Lily Greenberg Call made national headlines when she became the first Jewish appointee in the Biden administration to resign in protest of US policy in Gaza. Her resignation letter was a sharp rebuke of Washington's uncritical support for Israel and a moral appeal to recognize the devastating toll of a genocide, occupation, and a military aggression. Beyond her resignation, Lily has been a powerful voice in bridging Jewish identity with solidarity for Palestinian liberation, challenging narratives that conflate criticism of Israel's state policy with anti Semitism. She continues to recognize nationally and internationally to build political will for peace and justice in Gaza. Lily, your resignation was a powerful act of that inspired many. Can you share what led you to that decision and how you see your role now in building solidarity and shifting narratives within both Jewish and political communities?
Thank you, Hanya. So good to be here with y'all. I've been having such a good time reading the chat, and I kind of wishing we were all in person because I feel like the energy in this Zoom is amazing, and the energy of whatever room we would be in would be like really fantastic. And also, thank you so much, Sanjay and Allison. It's like it's so cool to meet you guys in person, and I'm, um, as someone who also has spent a lot of time inside the party apparatus, I know how hard it is to challenge it and to try to work within it when you are not when you're feeling disillusioned and let down by people that that you respect, that you admire, that you think you're on the same page with, and trying to build a better country and a better world. So major props to both of you, and I'm excited to be in this space together. um, there's so much I could talk about in terms of what like led me to the decision to resign. I think in many ways I might have so I resigned in May of 2024, and when I look back, I think like subconsciously I left my job mid-October 2023. Unfortunately, I uh, and in many ways like I think that if someone like me could leave and like make the transformation that I did. I started my career working for Kamala Harris when she was the senator in for California, my home state, and then 2024 at the DNC, I was laying on the pavement outside of the United Center with the uncommitted folks sleeping there over the sit-in, and I remember looking up and seeing her face on the big screen and thinking like, this woman started my career in politics, and I think the party doesn't understand like what kind of situation we're in. If now, instead of this being like the best day of my life and my career, I'm furious at her, right? And I'm like doing everything I can to change the direction that the party's going in. But I grew up in Young Democrats of America. I was like knocking doors on races, Scott Peters race when I was a kid, and then some local races, and was a fellow on the Hillary campaign. Like I was so locked in and committed, and always, really believed that politics was a vehicle to do good. Grew up in a very Jewish community that was very pro-Israel, but also, I mean, for us, it was a non-starter. It didn't matter. You were Republican, you were a Democrat, I didn't agree with a lot of people I grew up with on a lot of things, but we all agreed on Israel. And so for me, there was no misalignment at that point between my values of fighting for justice and like doing everything possible to be a force for good in our community and in our country and in the world. um, and and yeah, really saw politics as a vehicle to do that. Saw public service as a really honorable thing that you go into not for power and not for money, but because you genuinely care about representing people, or working on policy that changes people's lives for the better. And I graduated it from college in 2019 and immediately joined the then Kamala Harris campaign in Iowa. Eventually worked on the Biden campaign in 2020, and that's what led me to my role as an appointee in the administration. And I really enjoyed the work I did. It had nothing to do with foreign policy. I was working at the Department of Interior, very involved with Secretary Holland's work to, really have some tribal reconciliation and work on like boarding school healing, reconciliation panels, and I was so moved and like honored to do that work. And then October 7th happened, and it really impacted a lot of people in my community. Even like my sister had a close friend that was killed. And at that point, I thankfully had already been organizing with, if not now, in JVP and other groups doing work to build solidarity between Palestinians and Jews, and Jewish communities organizing in support of Palestinian liberation. And I was struck at first by the like compassion and care that was shown to me from the people that I worked with around October 7th, around what was happening, how that affected my people and community close to me, and then how that seemed to wane as the weeks went on. And I continued to be visibly upset and distraught every day at work and talk about it. And I think people first couldn't really understand. They're like, well, why do you care so much about Palestinians? You're Jewish, or you have Israeli family. Like, how are, and I was like, in the real world, those two things don't have to be like incongruous with each other. Um, and the atmosphere of silence became very heavy inside the administration. And I had lots of coworkers who would tell me, especially if they were, Muslim or just not white, that they didn't feel like they could say how they felt about what was happening, that it felt very like post 9/11. Um, and I realized that I had like a unique ability because some cover of who I am, and my background, that I could say how I felt, and no one could credibly call me anti-Semitic or that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I really used every opportunity to try and communicate that to my superiors, to White House leadership. I was organizing people inside the government and congressional staff, and there was a lot more happening under the surface than I think a lot of people saw of how many people were trying to use our proximity to power, and access to some of these people making decisions to try and shift U.S. policy, um, and how clear it was really that like so many people who worked in government believed that what we were doing was wrong, for varying levels and like on varying reasons, but um, it really felt like it felt very undemocratic to know that there was a core group of people making decisions on this who completely locked out almost everyone else. And it didn't feel like the administration that I wanted to work for, and it didn't feel like the party that I thought I was connected to. And it didn't, again, and I didn't feel like a lot of the people around me who also maybe agreed, but were not willing to step out of lockstep with the party or the president. Um, because of their career, because of their future. I was so like let down and disillusioned by that. Um, and so eventually I think I came to a point where like for my own integrity, I felt that I had to leave. And I also realized that in that moment, if I really thought about it from a moral perspective. If, what was the most impactful thing that I could do that would not maybe stop the genocide, but that could potentially stop it or could create some kind of wedge, And in a lot of the organizing spaces I'm in, we talk about the US pillars of US support for Israel and how there's four main ones. And one of them is the American Jewish community, but the other three are the weapons, defense contractors and that lobby, Christian Zionism and evangelicals, and the U.S. military like interests. And all of those are kind of obscured by a curtain of Jewish safety, right? That they use as their justification. And I was like, our job as American Jews and Jews in general, I think, is to do what we can to rip that curtain off and reveal that there's like a lot of other things going on here. And I was like, the biggest thing I can do to rip that curtain down is to resign, and to do it publicly and to be brave enough to do that, because I know people who left because of this issue who did not do it publicly. So once I framed it like that to myself, what is my moral obligation in this moment? It really became a no-brainer. And it was, a very challenging and hard thing in a lot of ways, but the actual and scary thing to do, but the actual act of leaving was easy, right? Because it was so clear that that was the right thing. And then the second part of this, Hanya, I feel like there's also kind of like it's a whole other. Um, the conditions for how we're even talking about this and how it relates to the party have changed so much from even last year to now. I think, you know, in some ways it's good that under Trump, people are much more willing to like to connect Trump to Netanyahu and to like make it to draw some connections between authoritarianism in Israel and authoritarianism here. But still, as we all know in this call, like the party itself and party leadership of the DNC is not willing to do that. Even if, like Allison, you said, I mean, the number 93% of Democrats don't support what Israel's doing. I don't know how anyone can look at that, any strategist, any consultant, and not be like, oh well, shit, we got to do something different. But I think we have a really like I see my role as helping people, one, giving people cover, you know, if they still feel like they need that. I do think it is important for Jews to be really, really vocal about this. And but also connecting the dots that this is not just about what happens to Palestinians. And it is not just about the Jewish community or anti-Semitism, or it's not even just about foreign policy, right? That every dollar we send to war is a dollar that we don't have for our resources here at home. And that this is all connected to the fact that there are a small amount of people who have immense power in this country and block meaningful progress on essentially every issue. And that the fascism and the authoritarianism that we export abroad is going to come back and already is coming back and already has come back for many people for decades to people in our own country. You know, people need to understand that this is about not just saying like no more genocide in Gaza or no more using our tax dollars to kill Palestinians, but that also we want those resources invested in our future and in life, right? And not in death. We want those dollars invested in our communities. And I think we have won the war or the battle of public opinion. I really think we have. I think most Americans, and honestly, some days I feel better about this than others, but I do think a lot of American Jews don't believe the lie that oppression and occupation are the price of safety anymore, or at least that lie is crumbling. And so now we have to figure out, you know, how do we, I don't necessarily know that I believe in like trying to change the minds of all the people in power because I think they actually know better, a lot of them. But how do we build enough power that we can show up with, you know, a big enough army and a big enough sword, not to make those kind of metaphors, but to replace, you know, I mean, we 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 need to learn how to build enough power that that we are a force that cannot be ignored.